Two communities, two flags, one continent. Both Indians and Pakistanis boarded planes to America with dreams of success. Yet decades later, one group is running Silicon Valley while the other is running gas stations. One has CEOs of Google and Microsoft, the other is still struggling for mainstream recognition. Why is it that two neighbors who share history, language, and culture have such dramatically different outcomes in the same country? When you examine the trajectory of South Asian immigrants in America, one of the most decisive differences between Indian and Pakistani communities lies in their educational priorities and the pathways through which they entered the United States. From the mid-1960s onwards, after the U.S. immigration reforms dismantled racist quotas, America began actively seeking highly skilled professionals to fuel its growing economy, particularly in science, technology, and medicine. Indian immigrants capitalized on this opportunity almost immediately. A significant portion of them arrived with engineering degrees, medical qualifications, and advanced training, often recruited directly into American universities, hospitals, and technology firms. They didn't just come for survival, they arrived already positioned for success, carrying with them a deep-rooted cultural emphasis on academic achievement as a non-negotiable standard. Education was never seen as optional, but rather the central pillar of social mobility and respect within Indian households, and this mindset seamlessly translated into rapid assimilation into America's professional and middle classes. In contrast, Pakistani immigrants, while also valuing education, came through different migration streams. A large portion entered through family reunification policies, refugee status, or business-related visas. This meant that the pool of Pakistani immigrants was much more diverse in terms of education and professional skills. Some were highly qualified doctors and engineers, but many others lacked advanced academic credentials or came from rural or semi-urban areas with limited access to elite education back home. Without the same concentration of highly skilled professionals, Pakistanis in America often gravitated toward small businesses, trucking, retail, or service industries, which, while respectable, did not provide the same prestige, income, or generational wealth-building opportunities as medicine, engineering, or technology. Over time, this difference in entry points and educational focus created a gap in upward mobility. Indian households, through relentless academic expectations, pushed their children into Ivy League schools, medical colleges, and Silicon Valley pipelines, while many Pakistani families encouraged stability through business ownership or vocational paths. This divergence has compounded over generations, with Indians consistently climbing the ladder of corporate America and Pakistanis often finding themselves confined to slower-moving economic sectors. The role of education, therefore, is not just about individual ambition, but about the very structural differences in how each community entered America and the long-term effects of those choices. One of the most striking differences between Indian and Pakistani immigrants in the United States lies in how they organize and support each other through community networks. For Indian immigrants, community building has often been strategic, professional, and deeply tied to upward mobility. When Indian engineers and doctors first arrived in the US in large numbers during the late 1960s and 1970s, they immediately created professional associations, cultural organizations, and alumni networks. Groups like the American Association of Physicians of Indian Origin or Indian Institutes of Technology alumni associations became powerful vehicles for networking, mentorship, and resource sharing. These platforms allowed new arrivals to access job opportunities, internships, scholarships, and even financial backing for entrepreneurial ventures. Beyond professional groups, Indian communities built strong cultural and religious institutions like temples, language schools, and cultural centers, which doubled as hubs for networking and reinforcing educational ambitions. Families used these spaces to arrange tutoring, share information about universities, and guide the next generation into high-paying careers. This web of interconnected support became self-reinforcing, ensuring that even newcomers who lacked resources could quickly plug into a community designed for collective advancement. Pakistani immigrants, while also forming community groups and mosques, have generally lacked the same cohesive professional networks. Many Pakistani organizations have focused heavily on religious identity and charity work rather than professional mentorship and academic pipelines. While mosques serve as important cultural anchors, they often prioritize spiritual and community cohesion over career advancement, which can leave younger generations without the same structured access to internships, job recommendations, or elite academic opportunities. Additionally, Pakistani communities in the US tend to be geographically scattered, with pockets in New York, Chicago, Houston, and smaller towns, but without the same concentration of high-skilled professionals forming the backbone of local institutions. Another important factor is the dominant career focus. Since many Pakistanis lean towards small business ownership, gas stations, or trucking, their community networks naturally emphasized financial survival and entrepreneurship rather than access to elite professional spaces. This created a dynamic where support existed but was limited to business advice or mutual aid rather than entry into prestigious industries. Over time, the absence of structured, professionalized networking systems has placed Pakistani immigrants at a disadvantage compared to Indians, who can rely on tightly knit circles that provide long-term advantages across generations. The perception of a community often determines how it is treated, how opportunities are extended, and how doors are opened or closed in society. Indian immigrants in the United States have benefited enormously from what has been called the model minority image. This branding was not an accident. It emerged from a combination of highly educated migrants, cultural emphasis on discipline, and visible contributions in medicine, engineering, and technology. When Americans think of Indian immigrants, they often picture successful doctors, Silicon Valley executives, or entrepreneurs who embody academic brilliance and professional achievement. The presence of Indian CEOs at companies like Microsoft and Google further amplifies this perception, creating a collective reputation that benefits even those who are not in such elite positions. This positive branding has made it easier for Indians to integrate into corporate spaces, access investment opportunities, and gain recognition in mainstream media. Cultural exports like Bollywood, yoga, and Indian cuisine also soften the public image, making Indian identity not just respected but admired and even celebrated in American society. By contrast, Pakistani immigrants have struggled under far more complicated and often negative branding. Geopolitical realities have weighed heavily on how Pakistanis are perceived, particularly in the post-9/11 era. Media portrayals often associate Pakistan with terrorism, extremism, or instability, which has had a direct effect on how Pakistanis are viewed in everyday interactions. Islamophobia also disproportionately affects Pakistanis, since they are not only visibly Muslim in many cases but also tied through nationality to a country that has been at the center of US foreign policy concerns for decades. This branding creates an invisible barrier where Pakistanis must work harder to gain trust, recognition, and acceptance in professional and social spaces. Unlike Indians, whose public figures are celebrated as innovators and cultural ambassadors, Pakistani representation in American mainstream culture remains limited and often framed through negative stereotypes. Even when Pakistanis succeed in business, medicine, or academia, their achievements are less amplified by the media, and the community as a whole does not benefit from a collective halo of success. Instead, they often face suspicion or stereotyping, which can discourage ambition and make upward mobility more challenging for younger generations. The career paths chosen by immigrant groups often shape their trajectory of success in a host country, and this is an area where the contrast between Indian and Pakistani immigrants in the United States becomes particularly visible. Indians, as a group, are disproportionately represented in highly paid, high-prestige fields such as medicine, engineering, finance, and technology. Their entry into the US through skilled worker programs laid the foundation for this trend, as many arrived already trained in these professions. Once in America, the cultural emphasis on excelling academically translated directly into career choices that offered not just financial security, but also long-term upward mobility. Parents instilled in their children the belief that careers in STEM fields and medicine were not merely options, but expectations, creating a steady pipeline of Indian graduates entering universities like MIT, Stanford, and Harvard before joining companies in Silicon Valley or prestigious hospitals. This concentration in high-paying industries also created role models and mentors within the community, further reinforcing the cycle. On the other hand, Pakistani immigrants often found themselves entering fields that demanded hard work, but did not always promise the same stability or prestige. Many were drawn to small businesses such as gas stations, convenience stores, restaurants, and trucking companies. These businesses offered immediate income and independence, especially for families that lacked the elite academic credentials to access corporate jobs or professional licenses. However, while entrepreneurship can be rewarding, the sectors most Pakistanis entered are highly competitive, vulnerable to economic downturns, and limited in terms of intergenerational prestige. Unlike a parent working in Silicon Valley, who can guide their children into internships or recommend them to tech companies, a parent running a small store may struggle to provide the same type of professional exposure. This difference in career ecosystems influences how the second generation views success and opportunity. Another important aspect is that professional visibility differs across these career paths. An Indian doctor or tech executive often contributes to the broader perception of the community as successful, while a Pakistani small business owner, though hardworking and financially stable, does not project the same image of elite achievement in American society. Over time, this divergence in career choices has shaped how each community is perceived and how their younger generations navigate opportunities, with Indians benefiting from built-in professional networks and Pakistanis relying more on resilience and independent effort to climb the ladder. Cultural adaptation plays a central role in determining how immigrant communities thrive in a foreign country, and the visibility of that culture in mainstream society can either accelerate or hinder integration. Indian immigrants in the United States have managed to project their culture in a way that not only maintains their identity, but also makes it appealing and marketable to the broader population. Over the past few decades, Bollywood films, Indian cuisine, yoga, meditation practices, and festivals like Diwali have entered mainstream American awareness. Schools often hold multicultural events that celebrate Indian traditions. Corporations embrace Indian holidays, and American celebrities openly practice yoga or experiment with Indian food. This cultural visibility normalizes Indian identity and, in many cases, makes it fashionable. In addition to cultural exports, Indians have secured a place in American popular imagination through entertainment and media. Actors, comedians, and writers of Indian origin, from Hollywood films to Netflix specials, have further cemented the idea of Indians as not only successful professionals, but also as relatable cultural contributors. This dual strategy of professional excellence and cultural visibility has made it easier for Indians to integrate without being forced to hide or compromise their identity. Pakistani immigrants, by contrast, have struggled to gain similar positive representation in mainstream American culture. Pakistani food, music, and traditions are rich and diverse, but they have not achieved the same level of exposure or acceptance outside their own community. While Indian restaurants have become a staple in most American cities, Pakistani cuisine is often folded under the broader Indian food label, erasing distinct recognition. Pakistani artists and public figures in American media remain limited, and when they do appear, their identity is frequently tied to politics, religion, or conflict-related narratives rather than art, innovation, or cultural vibrancy. Festivals like Eid are celebrated widely within the community, but lack the mainstream recognition that Indian festivals have gained. Additionally, negative associations tied to geopolitics and global security issues have made it more challenging for Pakistanis to present their culture as something to be celebrated rather than scrutinized. As a result, Pakistani identity in America is often less visible, less celebrated, and more misunderstood. This lack of cultural adaptation and representation reduces opportunities for positive integration, leaving the community to fight harder to establish its presence in American society. The long-term success of any immigrant community is measured not only by the first generation's achievements, but also by how well the second and third generations build upon those foundations. Among Indian immigrants in the United States, there has been a clear pattern of upward generational trajectory, largely because the first wave of immigrants laid a strong professional and educational groundwork. Many Indians who arrived during the 1960s and 1970s entered the country through skilled worker programs, meaning they were already doctors, engineers, or academics. Their children grew up in households where education was not just encouraged but expected, and this relentless focus on academic achievement produced a generation of Indian Americans who excelled in elite universities and moved into prestigious careers. The professional networks established by the first generation made it easier for the next generation to find internships, job placements, and mentorship opportunities, creating a cycle of advancement that reinforced itself with each passing decade. Today, the second generation of Indian Americans is not only thriving in traditional fields like medicine and technology, but also breaking into politics, media, and entertainment, further expanding the community's influence and visibility. The Pakistani generational trajectory has been more uneven, shaped by the varied backgrounds of the first generation. Many Pakistanis entered the United States through family reunification or business-oriented migration rather than specialized professional pathways. This meant that while some households were headed by highly educated professionals, others were built around small business ownership, trucking, or low-skilled jobs. The children of these families often grew up in environments where the pressure to contribute financially to the household sometimes overshadowed academic ambitions. Without the same degree of professional networks or structured mentorship, many second-generation Pakistanis lacked clear pathways into elite universities or top-tier careers. While some have broken through and achieved significant success, the overall trajectory has been slower compared to their Indian counterparts. Pakistani Americans often find themselves striving for stability rather than aggressively climbing professional ladders, and the lack of visible representation in politics, business, or culture further limits the sense of possibility for younger generations. This difference in generational momentum has created a widening gap, with Indian Americans building on compounding advantages, while many Pakistani Americans continue to fight for recognition and equal footing in a competitive society. The truth is, success is never just about hard work. It's about how you enter the system, the image you project, and the networks you build. Indians arrived with degrees and found doors open. Pakistanis arrived with ambition but often lacked the same keys to unlock opportunity. Indians branded themselves as the model minority. Pakistanis were branded by geopolitics and suspicion. One generation of difference has created a generational gap that is widening. But this is not a story of defeat. It is a wake-up call. If Pakistani immigrants want to thrive, They must invest in education, professional networks, and cultural visibility with the same intensity as their Indian counterparts. Because in America, perception is power, and without shaping the narrative, you risk being left out of it entirely.